asphalt of Bray Road stretches like a black ribbon, cutting through the heart of Walworth County, Wisconsin. It is a lonely stretch of pavement, flanked by dense rows of corn that seem to whisper in the wind when the sun goes down. The area is quiet and unassuming during the daylight hours, where farmers tend to their fields and locals drive their sedans into town for supplies. But as the shadows lengthen and the nocturnal creatures begin to stir, the atmosphere shifts into something far more oppressive. The mist rises from the damp earth and clings to the low-lying branches of oak trees, creating a suffocating gray blanket that obscures vision and distorts reality for anyone foolish enough to drive alone. Elkhorn, Wisconsin, is a place that prides itself on small town values and a tight-knit community spirit where everyone knows their neighbor by name. In the late 20th century, it was the picture of rural tranquility, nestled comfortably in the endless greenery of the American Midwest. However, beneath this veneer of pastoral peace lay a geography that was ancient and untamed, holding secrets that predated the arrival of European settlers. The land is dotted with thick woodlands and marshy bogs that have remained largely untouched by modern development. These hidden pockets of wilderness provide the perfect cover for things that do not wish to be found, and serve as a dark backdrop for a legend that would terrify the nation. The story of the Beast of Bray Road does not begin with a single scream in the night, but rather with a slow accumulation of unease that settled over the community like a heavy frost before the media frenzy and the national headlines. There were hushed whispers exchanged in local diners and taverns about something strange in the woods. Farmers reported livestock acting skittish and refusing to go near certain parts of the forest line. Hunters spoke of an eerie silence falling over the woods where birds would suddenly stop singing, as if a predator of immense power had entered their domain. It was a primal fear that tapped into the deepest instincts of survival, signaling that something unnatural was prowling the darkness. It was in the late 1980s, specifically around 1989, when the whispers turned into terrified shouts that could no longer be ignored. The era was one of transition, with the analog world slowly giving way to the digital. But in Elkhorn, the nights were still pitch black, and the isolation was absolute. The primary accounts that launched the legend centered on ordinary people who were simply trying to get home after a long shift at work or a night out with friends. They were not ghost hunters or thrill seekers, but credible witnesses who found themselves thrust into a nightmare that defied all logical explanation. Their stories were remarkably consistent, describing a creature that had no place in the natural order of Wisconsin wildlife. One of the most compelling early accounts came from a woman named Lorianne Endrizzi, who was the manager at a lodge near Lake Geneva, just a short drive from Bray Road. She was driving home late one night along the desolate stretch of road when she noticed a shape on the side of the shoulder. At first glance through the fog and the dim beams of her headlights, she assumed it was a person, perhaps a hitchhiker or someone in distress. She slowed her vehicle down with the intention of offering assistance, which was a common courtesy in such a rural area. But as she drew closer, the figure did not wave or call out for help, but instead remained crouched in a bizarre posture. As Lorianne peered through the passenger window, the figure began to move in a way that sent a jolt of adrenaline coursing through her veins. The creature was kneeling on its haunches, holding something in its hands that looked disturbingly like roadkill. The sheer size of the being was the first thing to register, as it appeared far too bulky and muscular to be a human being. Its body was covered in matted grayish-brown fur, and the anatomy of its legs seemed wrong with the joints bending in a way that suggested an animal physiology rather than a human one. It was a sight that her mind struggled to process as she idled on the dark road. Then the creature did something that would haunt Lorianne for the rest of her life and cement the legend of the beast in the annals of cryptozoology. It slowly rose from its crouched position to stand fully upright on two hind legs, reaching a towering height of over 6 feet. As it turned to face the car, she saw a face that was a grotesque hybrid of wolf and man. It had a long snout filled with sharp teeth and pointed ears that sat atop a broad, powerful head. But the most terrifying aspect was its eyes, which glowed with an intense amber luminescence, reflecting the car lights with a predatory intelligence that felt distinctly malevolent. Lorianne did not wait to see what the beast would do next, and she slammed her foot onto the gas pedal, causing her car to screech away from the scene. She watched in her rearview mirror half, expecting the creature to give chase. But it simply stood there watching her flee into the safety of the distance. When she arrived home, she was shaking uncontrollably and could barely articulate what she had seen to her family. For a long time, she hesitated to tell anyone outside her inner circle, fearing that she would be ridiculed or labeled as unstable. But the image of that wolf-like thing standing on 2 legs burned in her memory, refusing to fade with time. Around the same time, a local reporter named Linda Godfrey began to hear rumblings of these strange encounters. While working for a newspaper called the Walworth County Week, Linda was a skeptical journalist who dealt in facts and evidence, and she initially dismissed the rumors as nothing more than teen pranks or misidentified wildlife. However, as more calls came into the newsroom describing the same creature, she realized there was a story that needed to be investigated. She expected to find a logical explanation, perhaps a large bear or a feral dog that had been blown out of proportion by local imagination. What she found instead was a pattern of fear that was all too real. Linda Godfrey started digging into the reports, and she eventually created a file folder in her office that she jokingly labeled werewolf. It was a term she used with a degree of irony at first, but as she interviewed witness after witness, the label began to feel less like a joke and more like a terrified classification. The people she spoke to were traumatized, and many of them broke down in tears as they recounted their experiences. They described a creature that was aggressive and powerful, capable of moving with a speed and agility that no human in a costume could ever hope to replicate. The consistency in the descriptions of the creature's anatomy was chilling. To get a better understanding of what people were seeing, Linda commissioned a police sketch artist to sit down with the witnesses and draw the creature based on their descriptions. When the sketches were completed, they depicted a monster that looked like it had stepped straight out of a horror movie. The drawings showed a bipedal canine with a muscular torso human, like hands with claws, and a head that was unmistakably that of a timber wolf. When the newspaper published the story, along with the sketches, the reaction was immediate and explosive. The phones at the newspaper office began to ring off the hook with other locals claiming they had seen the exact same thing. Another harrowing encounter involved a woman named Doris Gipson, who had a run-in with the beast that was even more aggressive than what Lorianne had experienced. Doris was driving along Bray Road in the mist when she felt her car strike something hard on the pavement. Panicked that she had hit a person or a deer, she got out of her vehicle to inspect the damage and check for the victim. The night air was cold and silent as she walked around to the front of her car, but there was nothing there. No body, no animal, and no sign of an impact other than a lingering sense of dread. As Doris turned to get back into her car, she saw a massive dark shape emerging from the drainage ditch at the side of the road. It was moving with incredible speed, rushing toward her with a gait that was both loping and upright. She scrambled into the driver's seat and locked the door just as the creature slammed into the back of her vehicle. The force of the impact rocked the car violently, and she could hear the sound of claws scraping against the metal trunk. She floored the accelerator and sped away, while the creature pursued her for a short distance, running on its hind legs with terrifying endurance. When Doris finally reached a well-lit area and felt safe enough to stop, she got out to inspect her car for a second time. What she found confirmed that her experience was not a hallucination induced by stress or fatigue. Deep scratch marks were gouged into the metal of the trunk, clearly left by 3 large claws that were harder than steel. The scratches were too wide apart to be a coyote or a domestic dog, and too precise to be random road debris. It was physical evidence that something incredibly strong and sharp had attacked her vehicle with the intent to enter or disable it. The wave of sightings continued with a young man named Scott Bray, who lived on the very road that bore his family name. He reported seeing a strange, hulking figure near a rock pile in a field adjacent to the road. The creature was observing him from a distance, its body blending in with the twilight shadows until it moved. Scott described the beast as having broad shoulders and a tapering waist similar to a bodybuilder, but covered in dark hair. When it realized it had been spotted, the creature dropped down to all fours and sprinted away into the tree line with a speed that Scott estimated to be impossible for a human. This detail of the creature shifting between bipedal and quadrupedal movement became a recurring theme in the Bray Road timeline. Biologically, this is highly unusual, as animals like bears can stand on two legs, but cannot run effectively in that posture due to their pelvic structure. Wolves and dogs are built for four-legged movement and cannot sustain an upright stance for long periods, let alone run. The Beast of Bray Road seemed to defy these biological laws, moving fluidly in both stances, depending on the situation. This anomaly led many to speculate that the creature was something supernatural rather than a misidentified known animal. As the legend grew, researchers began to look into the history of the land to see if there were precedents for such a creature. They discovered that the indigenous tribes of Wisconsin had long held beliefs in spirit beings and shapeshifters that roamed the forests. The Ho-Chunk and Potawatomi people had legends of the Rougarou or similar entities that were often associated with water and deep woods. These beings were respected and feared, serving as guardians or omens of danger, while the modern name of werewolf was a European construct. The core concept of a dog-man hybrid had roots in the land that went back centuries. One particularly eerie historical account surfaced from 1936, involving a night watchman at the St. Coletta School for Exceptional Children in nearby Jefferson. While this was a few miles away from Bray Road, it fell within the same general geographic zone of high strangeness. The watchman, named Mark Shackleman, reported seeing a hairy creature digging in an ancient indigenous burial mound on the property. This connected the beast to the idea of desecration, or a guardian of sacred sites, suggesting a paranormal motivation for its presence, rather than just a hungry predator seeking food. Shackleman claimed that he approached the creature thinking it was an intruder, and was met with a growl that sounded almost like human speech. He said the beast uttered a 3-syllable word that sounded like Gadara before standing up to confront him. The creature was over 6 feet tall and possessed a terrifying visage that sent the watchman fleeing in terror. He returned the next night to investigate and found the creature again. But this time, he noticed a putrid smell of rotting meat and decay that accompanied it. This odor of death is a common trait in reports of cryptids like Bigfoot and Dogman. The word Gadara was later analyzed by researchers who found a potential biblical connection to the region of Gadara, where Jesus cast demons into a herd of swine. This added a layer of religious or occult dread to the legend, fueling theories that the Beast of Bray Road was not an animal at all, but a demonic entity. During the late 80s and early 90s, the United States was in the grip of the Satanic Panic, and the idea of a hellhound or a manifested demon fit perfectly into the cultural anxiety of the time. The creature became a symbol of the evil that lurked in the dark corners of the rural Midwest. Further darkening the narrative were reports of animal mutilations in Walworth County during the height of the sightings. Farmers were finding cattle and deer carcasses that had been surgically mutilated, with organs removed with precision that scavengers could not replicate. Some locals whispered about cult activity in the woods, suggesting that the beast might be a summoned entity or a guardian of dark rituals. While no concrete evidence of cults was ever found, the discovery of circle formations in the corn and strange artifacts in the woods kept the rumor mill churning. The geography of Bray Road itself seemed to amplify the fear, with its rolling hills and limited visibility acting as a stage for the unknown. The cornfields that lined the road grew tall in the summer, creating walls of green that could hide an army of monsters just feet from the passing cars. In the winter, the barren fields offered no cover, but the bitter winds and drifting snow created hallucinations of movement in the white expanse. The weather in Wisconsin is harsh and unforgiving, and it creates an environment where isolation is a daily reality for those who live on the outskirts of town. The psychological toll on the community of Elkhorn was significant, as parents began to forbid their children from playing in the woods or riding their bikes down Bray Road. The innocent rural lifestyle was tarnished by the fear that something was watching from the tree line. Halloween took on a darker tone, with the local legend becoming a very real source of terror, rather than just a fun holiday trope. People began to carry guns in their trucks, and spotlight searches became a weekend pastime for braver souls looking to prove or disprove the monster's existence. Skeptics worked hard to debunk the sightings, offering explanations that ranged from the plausible to the absurd. The most common theory was that people were seeing a large black bear suffering from mange, which would explain the lack of fur and the strange appearance. However, bears do not have the pointed ears or the long snout of a wolf, and they cannot run on their hind legs as described by the witnesses. The witnesses were adamant that what they saw was canine in nature, with a slender waist and powerful chest that did not match the physiology of a bear. Another theory proposed that the beast was a wolf-dog hybrid that had been released into the wild and grown to an immense size. While wolf hybrids can be large and aggressive, they do not possess the ability to walk upright, or the human-like hands that were reported. The sheer size of the creature, often estimated at 7 feet tall, when standing also ruled out any known species of wolf or dog. The discrepancies between the known wildlife of Wisconsin and the descriptions of the beast left a void that only the paranormal could fill. One night, a group of teenagers decided to test their courage by driving down Bray Road and parking near the epicenter of the sightings. They shut off their engine and sat in silence, listening to the sounds of the night and waiting for a thrill. For a long time, there was only the sound of crickets and the wind rustling the dry corn stalks. Then the air grew heavy, and a foul stench of wet dog and sulfur began to seep into the car through the ventilation. The laughter and bravado died instantly as they realized they were not alone. A heavy thud shook the vehicle, as if something massive had landed on the trunk, causing the suspension to creak under the weight. The teenagers screamed as a large hairy hand, with black claws, slapped against the rear window, leaving a smudge of grease and dirt. They scrambled to start the engine, but the car stalled in their panic, adding to the terror of the moment. Outside, they could hear heavy breathing that sounded like a bellows, heaving in the darkness, just inches from the glass. It was a confrontation with a predator that viewed them as trapped prey in a metal cage. When the engine finally roared to life, the driver floored the gas, peeling out onto the asphalt and leaving a cloud of tire smoke behind. As they sped away, they looked back to see a pair of glowing yellow eyes suspended in the darkness at a height that was impossible for a deer or coyote. The eyes did not blink or waver, but simply watched them go with a cold detachment. The encounter left the group traumatized, and they refused to ever return to Bray Road at night, adding their story to the growing pile of testimony. Linda Godfrey eventually compiled her investigations into a book titled The Beast of Bray Road, Trailing the Truth. Her work brought the legend to a national audience and cemented Elkhorn as a hotspot for cryptozoology enthusiasts. She treated the subject with journalistic integrity, never claiming to know exactly what the creature was, but refusing to dismiss the witnesses. Her work validated the experiences of the locals and provided a structured record of the phenomenon that remains the primary source for researchers today. The aftermath of the major sighting wave in the early 90s did not result in the capture of a monster, but rather a lingering mystery. No body was ever found, and no clear photograph was ever taken despite the numerous trail cameras set up by hunters. Footprints were cast in plaster, showing paw prints that were enormous, with claw marks that dug deep into the mud. These casts were analyzed by biologists who could not definitively identify them as belonging to any known native species, leaving the question open-ended. Today, Bray Road remains a quiet stretch of pavement that looks deceptively normal to the casual observer passing through. The corn still grows tall, and the mists still rise from the fields, but the intensity of the sightings has faded with time. However, reports still trickle in every few years from new witnesses who know nothing of the legend. They describe the same hulking figure, the same glowing eyes, and the same terrifying speed, suggesting that the beast has not left, but has simply become more elusive. The legend has become a part of Wisconsin folklore, woven into the identity of Walworth County, much like the Mothman is to Point Pleasant. It serves as a reminder that even in the modern world, there are corners of the map that remain unexplained. The Beast of Bray Road represents the primal fear of the wild, the idea that we are not the apex predators we think we are when we step out of our lighted homes and into the dark. It is a story that refuses to die because the darkness of the woods is eternal. As you drive down Bray Road tonight, you might tell yourself that it is just a story, a myth concocted by bored locals and sensationalist media. You might turn up the radio and keep your eyes fixed on the yellow lines of the road, trying to ignore the shadows dancing in the periphery. But if your car were to break down and the lights were to fail, you would find yourself scanning the cornfields with a primal dread. You would listen for the snap of a twig or the heavy breathing of a beast that has been waiting for you to return to its domain. And in that silence, you would know that the legend is very real.